If Nvidia does this, the price of the 4090 is probably going to go down by half or even less. If an RTX 5080 is faster than a 4090, almost half the price and more efficient, and it's $999 like a 4080, wouldn't the 4090 automatically probably be worth like $700 or $800? That's why they're going to likely discontinue the 4090 if that happens. Good news for people buying them used, but not so good if you just spent $2,000 on the 4090. Let's talk about some Nvidia GPUs, and a pretty major one is likely to be discontinued next month. That's going to be the Nvidia GeForce RTX 4090, and of course the 4090D and whatever other variants were overseas like in China. So this is like pretty significant news because Nvidia doesn't always discontinue a GPU when a new series comes out. Like when the Super series came out, sure, you kind of stopped seeing the original 4080, that went. The 4070 Ti, that also went. You don't really see it too much. But the 4070 is still being sold alongside the 4070 Super. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. Them discontinuing the 4090, that's like pretty big, I think, in terms of like what's available out there for the GPUs going forward in the next few months. So that's why I think you should pay attention to this, because it's going to affect everything else in the market. So the RTX 4090 is, of course, the best GPU that you can possibly buy today. Forget the price, it's just the best. Is it expensive? Yes, it is. Most of the time, the price seems to average, at least in the US, closer to $2,000 than closer to its $1,600 MSRP, $1,599. In Europe and other places, it can be considerably more expensive. I know that from all of you who watch from overseas, and you always say how much more expensive these GPUs can be in your particular country. So discontinuing the 4090 is not going to help matters too much because people still want the 4090. It's still going to be an ultra powerful GPU. Of course, there are going to be a couple of people, the enthusiasts, who want a 5090, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to get it or even get it for a decent price. Remember, the GPUs like the 4090 and the 5090, they live in that space where it's not only gamers going for them. You're going to have all of the AI craze in places like in China. They were taking 4090s and actually using them for machine learning, as do a lot of smaller companies everywhere else around the world, simply because it's hard to get Nvidia data center GPUs. So people figure they're just going to slap a 4090 or a bunch of them in like some type of farm and use those for AI. It's at least a better option than not having any GPU, and it's, you know, the strongest gaming GPU that you can get. Even AMD is thinking of, like, you know, crossing their Radeon gaming line with their pro level GPUs, making them just a singular product so they can focus and just have one product stream going out instead of, you know, two divergent areas. So the 4090 is a good example, and the 5090 that's coming up, of a GPU that, you know, used by content creators, 3D artists. It doesn't only have the role as being the best gaming GPU. That's why they're so expensive. The 24 gigabytes of VRAM does make a difference for a lot of people, the non-gamers. Typically for gaming, 24 gigabytes of VRAM, although it's nice at like 4K in some very specific use cases, for the most part, 16 gigabytes of VRAM like you find on the 5080 or 4080 that we have now, 4080 Super, seems to be more than enough. So if Nvidia does discontinue the 4090, which by all means has been a very successful GPU, when it came out, it was sold out, scalpers everywhere. That was one of the only RTX 40 series GPUs to have that this generation. Remember, we had that GPU shortage back with RTX 3000. The 4090 kind of carried that over in the beginning. There was a period of time where it became more available, and even now it is more available, but pricing has stayed really high. It's still hard to find a good deal on the 4090. That simply doesn't exist. You may be able to get one on the used market for cheaper, but in general, the new prices have stayed above its MSRP, which is typical for GPUs. They usually don't go on discounts like all that much. But if Nvidia discontinues the 4090, it means they're not going to be making more, and everybody in their, you know, supply chain, the third-party AIBs, they're going to be focusing on the 50 series. Maybe the 5090 and even the 5080 are going to be such a jump up in performance that Nvidia feels like it might even be be justified. Just forget about the 4090. It is, after all, their previous generation, but like I said, it's not always that Nvidia stops their previous generation to go forward with the new generation. Sometimes they keep those GPUs, if they have to, ticking alongside and being sold the newer stuff, depending on how the market is. If they don't want to get certain GPUs out at a certain time, this happens a lot. Like I mentioned the example with the 4070, but that's happened even with the RTX 3000. We had some of those GPUs, especially on the lower end, going well into the RTX 4000 family. So we had, rumors before that like a 5090 could be significantly faster than a 4090 by maybe like, 50 to 75%. Who knows what these numbers really mean, if it's rasterization or if it's going to be on like DLSS 3 with frame generation. Nvidia likes to do that a lot. We're not going to know until we get closer and see some actual reviews and things like that. But no doubt, judging by how fast Nvidia has been going with all of their GPUs in general, how much money they put in R&D, you can bet the 5090 likely won't disappoint. It's going to be expensive, but it's going to be a very fast GPU. Something more interesting that can explain the 4090 being, pretty much taken out of the market, the 5080. What if a GPU comes out like the 5080, and we had some rumors that it may be 10% faster than a 4090, while maybe sipping less power? The 4090's TDP is about 450 watts. The 5080 may be 400 watts and below. That's a nice little savings there if you consider it may be up to 10% faster than something like a 4090. Furthermore, if you look at the pricing of what a 5080 should be, look at the 4080 Super, $999. We would hope that the 5080 would be $999. We never know with Nvidia, so there's a chance they could, put it back up to $1199. But anyway, it's still cheaper than a 4090, so it doesn't make sense to keep a $1,600 to $2,000 4090 family of GPUs, considering all the different AIB models on the market, if you're then going to release a 5080 that Nvidia would like to sell their 80 series GPUs for almost half the price, and it's going to be 10% faster and more power efficient. That's going to pretty much take the 4090 out of the running, and that's why they likely wouldn't want to sell it new, because it's going to not really make any sense. The 5080 is just going to cannibalize all of those sales. Now, the 5090 is a different story, because like I said, it's going to be probably harder to get, even more expensive. So that's a GPU that really has no competition. Even if we look at AMD has said that they're not going to have a high-end GPU. They called it King of the Hill. They're not going to have a King of the Hill GPU, probably for RDNA 4 next generation. So while we saw the RTX 7900 XTX compete with the 4080, maybe even the 4090 in some games like Call of Duty, I remember in Call of Duty, that GPU was getting very close and beating the RTX 4090 in rasterization. So very impressive. But AMD wants to focus their efforts on the mid-range, so they get a bigger consumer market, basically, and more developers optimized for AMD. Because if they only have a few Halo GPUs, not that many people are going to buy them. Developers aren't going to be interested in a very small group, nothing to optimize, and then developers go to Nvidia, and then AMD is no longer relevant. So I see their point there, but Nvidia is going to have no competition in that high-end market. So it's going to be interesting to watch the availability and pricing of the new RTX 50 series GPUs. I mean, obviously, if a 5080 comes out and it's faster than a 4090, the 4090 is going to tank in value a lot. It's going to go probably under $1,000. If the 5080 is around $999, if we're going to go by the 4080 Super pricing, no idea what Nvidia is going to do. But if it is that, I don't think any reasonable gamer is going to spend more for a 4090, because you're going to get a better GPU. Aside from the VRAM, the 5080 likely will still have maybe only 16 gigabytes of VRAM, but it's going to be GDDR7, so more efficient, probably faster, and gaming doesn't necessarily need 24 gigabytes of VRAM. So I think the 4090 might be outpaced very, very quickly, and those values are probably going to drop pretty significantly. All right, guys, let me know what you think down below. What do you think is going to happen in the next few months with RTX 50 series? Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.